It was the dead of night over the Eastern Front, 1942. The air was freezing, thick with smoke, and alive with fear. German soldiers looked to the sky, not for planes, but for ghosts. They called them Nachthexen, the night witches. No one ever saw them coming. There was no warning, no roar of engines, just the faint, haunting whoosh of wind before death fell from above. And then, silence, followed by fire. These were not male pilots or battle-hardened soldiers. They were young Soviet women, daughters, students, nurses, turned warriors of the night. And they became the most feared bombing squadron in Nazi Germany's nightmares. In 1941, when Hitler's forces invaded the Soviet Union, the Red Army was desperate. Entire divisions were being crushed, cities burned, and in the chaos, one woman stood up. Marina Raskova, the Soviet Union's most famous female aviator. Known as the Russian Amelia Earhart, Raskova had already set flight records before the war. But now, she wanted something bolder, an all-female combat unit. Her idea was radical. Women weren't supposed to fight, let alone fly. But Stalin saw the propaganda value. So in October 1941, he signed an order: the creation of the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. It would be staffed entirely by women, pilots, navigators, mechanics, every role. Many were barely out of their teens. They wore oversized men's uniforms, their boots stuffed with paper because none fit. Their planes? Outdated wooden biplanes made of canvas and plywood. The Po-2, a plane so slow that German fighters often stalled trying to chase it. But in the right hands, these fragile machines became instruments of terror. The mission was simple and suicidal. Fly low at night, drop bombs. Return before dawn, if you survived. The women learned to kill in silence. They'd cut their engines mid-flight and glide through the dark, unseen. The only sound the enemy heard, the faint swish of air through wings. That sound became the whisper of death. It was how the Germans named them the Night Witches. Each woman carried just 2 bombs. To hit multiple targets, they'd fly 8 to 18 missions a night. Sleep was a luxury. Fear was constant. But they didn't stop. One of them, Nadezhda Popova, remembered flying through storms of bullets. She lost count of how many times her plane was hit. She once returned to base with 42 bullet holes in her Po-2 and still completed her mission. When asked later what kept her going, she said, "Revenge. We wanted to show that we could do more than anyone thought." By 1943, the Night Witches had turned the tide. They destroyed enemy camps, supply lines, and fuel depots, crippling Nazi morale. German soldiers began refusing to light cigarettes at night, fearing they'd be seen. The witches' attacks were so precise that the Wehrmacht offered an Iron Cross to any soldier who could shoot one down. No one ever claimed it, but victory came at a price. The missions were deadly, many never returned, yet even in death their legend grew. Their courage haunted the German front lines and inspired millions of Soviet women back home. By the end of the war, the Night Witches flew over 30,000 missions and dropped 23,000 tons of bombs. They had rewritten what it meant to be a soldier and a woman. It's midnight on a frozen airfield somewhere in southern Russia. Snow whips through the air like shards of glass. The roar of engines echoes faintly in the distance. German bombers. But on the other side of that same sky, another sound begins to rise. The creak of wooden wings and the cough of small engines. A group of young women, barely in their 20s, are preparing for takeoff. They wear baggy men's uniforms, their hair tucked under flight caps. Their faces are pale from exhaustion, but their eyes burn with something fierce, defiance. Their aircraft? The Polikarpov Po-2, an open cockpit biplane made of plywood and canvas. It had no radar, no radio, no armor. It could barely reach 100 miles per hour. It was a relic, used for training and crop dusting before the war. But to these women, it was everything. A fragile wooden bird that carried both their fear and their fury. And tonight, it would carry bombs. Each plane could take only 2 small bombs at a time. So, the night witches had to fly again and again and again. Some flew up to 18 missions a night. No headlights, no parachutes, no guns, only darkness, and the cold breath of death whispering in their ears. Before every flight, the squadron commander would call the names of the crew. Some women kissed small medals or photos hidden in their pockets. Others simply stared at the night sky, silently whispering a prayer. They weren't afraid of dying. They were afraid of failing, because failure meant letting the enemy live another day. The mechanics, also women, loaded the bombs by hand, their fingers numb from the cold, their faces smudged with oil. They worked without light, guided only by the glow of the moon. And when everything was ready, a faint whistle signaled the moment of truth. Engines coughed to life. One by one, the wooden planes lifted into the night, like ghosts rising from the earth. High above the dark fields, the women would kill their engines and glide silently. The sudden quiet was terrifying. The only sound was the soft flutter of fabric wings. They drifted closer, closer, until they could see the faint glow of enemy campfires below. Then, click, a small switch. The bombs dropped. Moments later, explosions tore through the ground. Screams! Chaos. Fire. Before the Germans could react, the night witches were gone. They'd restart their engines miles away and vanish back into the darkness. To the terrified soldiers below, it was as if the night itself had attacked them. But not every mission ended in triumph. The Po-2 was slow, painfully slow, and the German searchlights were fast. Once a spotlight caught a plane, every anti-aircraft gun turned skyward. Flames lit up the night as shells tore through the air. Tracer rounds streaked like burning arrows, cutting across the sky. A single hit could set the fragile canvas plane ablaze. Many of the night witches were burned alive mid-air. Others vanished into the black forests, never found again. But those who survived never stopped flying. Even after seeing their closest friends fall, they took off again the next night, because the war wasn't over. Among them was Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the regiment's commander. She demanded discipline, but treated every pilot like her daughter. She rarely showed emotion, except when a plane didn't return. Then, she'd walk quietly to the edge of the airfield, stare into the dark, and whisper, "Another star has joined the sky." That's how the women honored their fallen. They looked up at the night and believed their friends were still flying, somewhere among the stars. By early 1943, the night witches had become a nightmare for the Nazi army. Their tactics were so precise that German officers began reporting phantom attacks. They said the women could appear anywhere, at any time. Superstition spread. Some soldiers claimed these pilots were not human, but real witches blessed by the devil himself. But the truth was far simpler. They were just women who refused to surrender. Their courage came from loss, their strength from rage. Many had seen their families killed, their homes destroyed. They carried that grief into the sky, turning it into fire. Every mission, every drop of fuel, every bomb they released was their message to Hitler's army. You will never break us. By the summer of 1943, the legend of the night witches had already begun to spread across Europe. Whispered in the trenches, murmured around campfires, and feared in every German outpost from the Volga to the Black Sea. Soldiers who once mocked the idea of women pilots now trembled at the faint sound of their engines. That soft, ghostly hum that drifted through the night just before destruction came raining down. To the Germans, it sounded like the tearing of fabric, a whisper before death. To the women in those fragile biplanes, it was the song of revenge. The German High Command gave them their infamous name, Nachthexen, or night witches. They claimed the women's planes made a witch's broom sound as they glided silently through the air. It was meant as an insult, but the women took it as a badge of honor. They started painting broomsticks and witch symbols on the sides of their planes. laughing in the face of death, even as the odds grew impossible. In one mission report, a pilot wrote, "We had no radar, no guns, no armor, only courage, and the night itself." That courage was tested every single night. The night witches flew without parachutes. Why? Because the planes were too light. Every ounce mattered. Even the weight of a parachute could mean not making it back. So they went into the sky knowing one truth. If they were hit, they would burn. And yet, they went anyway. The Germans were desperate to stop them. They offered Iron Crosses and promotions to any pilot who could shoot one down. But the Po-2's slow speed made it nearly impossible to hit. German fighters would dive too fast, overshooting their targets. The Night Witches learned to turn their weakness into an advantage, zigzagging through the night sky like ghosts that refused to die. Every time the Nazis thought they'd seen the last of them, a new wave appeared, flying low, silent, deadly. They struck at ammunition depots, bridges, fuel stores, leaving nothing but fire and confusion behind. Still, the cost was brutal. Every dawn, not all planes returned. Empty bunks became a familiar sight. The women grew used to flying with grief as their co-pilot. One mechanic wrote in her diary, "We stopped crying after the first winter. The sky doesn't allow tears." But the Night Witches didn't just fight for revenge. They fought for respect. Even within the Soviet military, male officers doubted them. At first, they were given the oldest, weakest aircraft and barely enough fuel. They were told women couldn't handle night combat. So they proved them wrong. Mission after mission, they outperformed entire male regiments. They navigated through storms, slipped past anti-aircraft fire, and struck deeper behind enemy lines than anyone thought possible. Soon, Soviet generals began to take notice. Their regiment, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, earned multiple Hero of the Soviet Union medals. Even Joseph Stalin himself personally commended their service. A rare honor. But honors meant little compared to what they'd endured. The freezing winds, the constant roar of explosions below, the smell of fuel and smoke clinging to their uniforms, the endless cycle of takeoff, attack, and loss. Yet in every face, whether pilot, navigator, or mechanic, there burned a single, unshakable truth. They were no longer fighting as women. They were fighting as warriors of the sky. As winter returned, so did the long, endless nights. Perfect for their missions. Perfect for terror. Entire German divisions began to relocate simply because of the fear these women brought. Officers requested to move their camps further west, away from the flight paths of the witches. In captured diaries, German soldiers wrote of sleepless nights, listening for that faint, ghostly glide that meant death was near. But inside the Soviet camp, laughter still echoed. The women sang, shared cigarettes, and joked even after losing friends. It wasn't denial, it was survival. They had learned that to keep flying, they had to keep their hearts alive. A veteran once said, "We were not witches, but if fear made us seem like magic, then so be it. We used their fear as our wings." By 1944, the Night Witches had flown over 30,000 missions. They had dropped more than 23,000 tons of bombs. And their enemies? They had learned that courage has no gender. Each mission etched their legacy deeper into the history of war. Not as symbols, but as soldiers who turned the darkness itself into their greatest weapon. By 1945, the war was nearly over. The once unstoppable Nazi machine was crumbling. But for the Night Witches, the war's end didn't mean peace. It meant flying harder, faster, and deeper than ever before. Their orders were clear. Keep bombing, keep pushing, keep burning the enemy out of their last strongholds until the final surrender. Even with the Red Army marching across Eastern Europe, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment didn't rest. Each night, they climbed into their wooden planes, feeling the wind slice across their faces like blades. No guns, no armor, no mercy. Just courage, and the roar of the engine fading into the cold darkness. The sky over Poland and Germany became their second home and their graveyard. Searchlights cut through the clouds, tracing their fragile wings. Anti-aircraft fire burst like white stars in the night. Every explosion illuminated the truth. The war might be ending, but death still hunted them. One of the pilots, Irina Sebrova, later recalled, "By that time, we had stopped being afraid. We had lost too many to fear. We only wanted to finish what we started." That was the spirit of the Night Witches. Exhausted, freezing, and starving, yet unbroken. Their final missions were some of the most dangerous of the entire war. German troops were desperate, firing wildly into the sky. But the women didn't stop. They flew hundreds of kilometers each night, often without proper rest. They didn't care about medals anymore. They didn't care about history. They only cared about each other and making it home. Inside the cockpits, the smell of oil and gunpowder mixed with fear and determination. The navigator would whisper coordinates, the pilot would nod silently, and then the bombs would drop, shaking the earth below. In the darkness, there were moments of beauty too. Sometimes, as they flew back over the forests, they saw the horizon begin to glow, not from fire, but from the first hint of dawn. That faint orange light meant survival. Another night conquered, another mission done. But not everyone saw the sunrise. On one mission in April 1945, a PO-2 was hit by flak over western Poland. The plane caught fire mid-air, and instead of crashing into the ground, the pilot aimed directly at an enemy fuel depot. The explosion lit up the sky. Both women died instantly. But their sacrifice destroyed an entire German supply line. A final act of defiance that echoed across the front. Their comrades found only ashes, no bodies, only burnt earth where courage had turned into legend. When Victory Day finally came, the surviving Night Witches stood together on the airfield. Their uniforms torn, their faces covered in soot. Some laughed, some cried. Most just stared at the sky in silence. They had flown more than 30,000 missions, dropped over 23,000 tons of bombs, and lost 32 sisters in the process. They had fought not just the Nazis, but prejudice, mockery, and impossible odds. And they had won. Yet, when the medals were handed out, recognition was slow to come. Many were dismissed quietly after the war, told to go home, marry, and forget. But history did not forget. Decades later, veterans would gather, gray-haired, smiling faintly, their medals glinting like fragments of starlight. And when asked how they endured, one of them simply said, "Because we had no choice. We were fighting for our country, and for the right to prove that courage is not a man's word." In Germany, the legend of the Night Witches lived on too. Survivors of the front still spoke of them, of the silent planes that came from nowhere, of the flames that devoured their camps, of the witches who flew without fear. Some swore they could still hear them at night. That faint, haunting sound of fabric wings gliding through the wind, a whisper in the dark, a reminder of what terror truly meant. As years passed, their wooden planes rotted away, their airfields turned into farmland. But their story, their fire, never faded. Because the Night Witches were never about bombs or battles. They were about belief, about proving that even in the darkest sky, human will can still burn brighter than war itself. They called them witches, but what they really were warriors. And in the blackest nights of history, they flew so that light could rise again.